Welcome to the Creepin' It Real show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow us on Twitter at creepin_it and like us on Facebook at The Creepin' It Real Show. Do you have a paranormal story you'd like to share with us? You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com.
Me? I'm locking doors on my children.
Oh, great mom.
I was on listening to For the Baby to Wake Up duty, but now I'm over that, so.
Got it. And with that one, hello, creepers. Welcome to Creepin' It Real. I hit record and I could hear somebody opening or locking doors. I'm like, what the hell is that? Somebody's leaving us already. It's okay. I thought it was funny. With that, how are you doing today, Moni?
Well, good now that I've been outed as a shitty mom, but other than that, I'm pretty good. I toured the upcoming Comic-Con museum last night, and it's going to be in Balboa Park. For those of you who are familiar with San Diego, is a pretty epic area Balboa Park is, and I can't say too much about it. You can go now to comiccon.org and become a charter member and get invited to exclusive events that are going to take place there. But it is a huge, huge space, and all I can really say is anything that you imagine as a fan of really anything, including creepy stuff, because they're going to be doing a horror movie showing on the 29th already, and the space isn't even going to be open for a couple years, but anything that you can imagine, anything that you geek is going to be, this place is going to be by the fans, for the fans, and I cannot wait for it to open. You guys are going to be pleasantly surprised.
Nice. I'm sorry, where did you say this was?
The Comic-Con Museum in Balboa Park. It was where, if you guys are familiar with the area, the Hall of Champions was there. It was a sports thing, and it's a huge, huge, 3-story space, and they're going to make it super gorgeous and technology fitted, and there's going to be opportunity for any kind of event, activity, makerspace that you can imagine. Nice. We're just not allowed to talk too much about it, but yeah, and the people behind it, I know them personally, and if anyone can make, they really kind of, Comic-Con wants to bring kind of the fan interaction back, that grassroots that they had when they started in the 70s. And so this is kind of their way of doing that, is having something that's available year round for people to visit, not just and ever changing, so that, you don't see the same thing every time you come in. And I'm really excited to see them do this.
Nice. That's perfect for San Diego. That's awesome.
That's a pretty good approach to things, to try to keep things more intimate and fresh. So I definitely, I like that idea.
Good. Yardley, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. Just relaxing, excited to do the show. I'm trying to get my excitement level up for Roswell to your level.
I know that's probably not possible, since it's a little bit of a personal project of mine, not really y'all's, so thank you for bearing with me and letting me finally discuss Roswell.
But gosh, I love aliens. Let's do this.
Well, before that, let's hit some weird news. I haven't even looked at y'all's weird news, because I really like being, not knowing what we're going to be discussing on the weird news, like everybody else, so I'm interested in hearing what your Jaws mystery is here.
Yeah, so this story came out a week or two ago now, so it's old news. But it's kind of interesting. And next week, just quick spoiler, we're going to be talking about Stephen King, so it's a little bit relevant there too. Basically, in the movie Jaws, there is a woman wearing a blue bandana. She's just an extra in the film, and she disappeared. They never recorded her name because so many extras, so many people signed up to be extras on that film. But she disappeared, as did another woman in the same area at the same time. The lady in the dunes was naked and decaying, her head almost decapitated, both wrists lopped off by the time she was discovered in July 1974 in a cluster of trees near Race Point Beach in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Anyway, long story short, they had the bandana tucked beneath her head. It was a blue bandana, just like the one seen on the woman who was in the film.
Oh,
The
wow.
article link actually shows a picture of the woman from the film. And despite her gruesome state, whoever killed the lady left her body in a serene scene just a few dozen feet from the sand roads where people usually came to explore the coast. So again, this was an area that was heavily trafficked by extras and people who were interested while the film was being made, and also, of course, when it came out and met with so much success. And this all came back in the spotlight because Joe Hill, son of horror novelist Stephen King, who was a best-selling novelist in his own right, actually took his grown sons to see the movie Jaws when it came out in the theaters again in 2015 for the anniversary of it. And he, all of a sudden, like something connected in his brain, I guess maybe horror writers are wired this way, that how much the extra in this movie, and there's renderings here in this link, if they were to recreate her head, because there was so much damage done to her when she was murdered, how much she looks just like this extra who nobody can track down. And they never did find the identity of the victim either. And the way that she was like lovingly staged and had the blue bandana, just like in the movie, there are a lot of similarities between this victim and this kind of possibly missing woman, since no one's ever come out. I mean, why wouldn't you come out and claim that you were in this movie if you were, you know? And nobody has ever been able to verify who this person was. So she might be this murder victim.
Wow. That's serious memory right there, putting two and two together. That's pretty crazy.
Joe Hill cracks the case, man. The Stephen King.
Yeah, and then when you're looking at that, what is it? That photograph.
Yeah. The recreation. Yeah.
That's that's some crazy stuff. I don't know.
Yardley, there's a goat statue. What's up with that? That looks awesome, actually.
Well, actually, for my weird news, I'm just talking about something that happened in Arkansas. I think it was around Wednesday. So, per CBS News, out in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Satanic Temple out there, they temporarily placed a bronze statue of a goat-headed winged creature called Baphomet at the Arkansas State Capitol. It was during a rally to call for the removal of a Ten Commandments monument that was already mounted on Capitol grounds. So you had around 150 Satanists. There were atheists out there at the location as well that were protesting. And also you had, Christians that were attending to kind of counter the people that were out there. So essentially, what the Satanic Temple is trying to say is that the Ten Commandments monument that they have out there violates constitutional freedom of religion rights, and that their 7.5 foot statue showing the 14th century idol basically showed, religious tolerance, and it had every right to be out there as well. So Ivy Forrester, who's the organizer of the rally, a quote from them says, if you're going to have one religious monument up, then it should be open to others. And if you don't agree with that, then let's just not have any at all. Now, of course, so now the state legislature, basically they had came up with this law for the state or something like that, saying that you could place a monument on the state grounds if, one, you needed to have a person who was already in the legislature sponsor it. Well, one of the reasons why they're suing is just the fact that I think we all know, especially in politics, that even if a person is 100% in the right, nobody can back the right of Satanists to put up a statue because it would be political suicide. So that's kind of a poison. So it's kind of a poison pill because you're never going to get anyone to back it, in the legislature, even if they know the grounds, are the same as with the Ten Commandments. So basically what they ended up doing was they had it out there all day Thursday. They ended up taking it back. And what they're trying to do is join a religious discrimination lawsuit against Arkansas that the American Civil Liberties Union that brought, basically separation of church and state. You shouldn't have that stuff out there. You have to be fair and not have it out there at all. I think that they've actually got very good grounds to stand on with this lawsuit. But also at the same time, I do think that it's kind of a big deal. I don't think you should have anything out there, but if you're going to do it, if everybody else has the money to get their monument out there, I think you have to let everyone do it. What about y'all?
I mean, I agree with you. I live in Atlanta, whereas little town Arkansas probably not on the same page as you and I. I'm all for whatever you believe is, if you believe in the one-eyed flying spaghetti monster, then by all means, believe in the one-eyed flying spaghetti monster. So, and I celebrate that. So I have no problem with anybody's religious beliefs, and I'm all for anybody's. It's a cool statue.
It is.
Regardless of what it means, I think it's a fucking cool statue. So I would go and look at it and be like, wow, that's kind of cool. I personally am not a Satanist, so it's not going to be like, I don't think people are going to look at it and go, makes me want to be a Satanist. It's just something you can look at and like admire in its own right and not feel like, oh, the devil's calling me, give me a break. I find that kind of mentality really close-minded, but that's just me. What about you, Moni?
No, you can't have it always. If you're going to have freedom of speech and you're going to, separate church and state, then you have to separate all church and state, and you have to have freedom of all speech. So it's not my favorite thing. It is kind of a cool statue. The ideals behind it aren't my cup of tea, but also maybe the ideals behind Christianity or Catholicism are all the things that are still apparently widely accepted and, in places where I don't think they should be necessarily, where they have no business is what I mean. Right. All or none. I'm cool with none. So
yeah. I mean, there's a reason why we have separation of church and state, and it seems like we're kind of going reverse in that ideology these days. But you can't. I mean, everybody's God or everybody's Satan in your heart is different. So it's like, how do you take that and bring it to the forefront and tie it on to how we run the government? So I have no problem with statues. I think this thing's cool. I wouldn't look at it and think, gee, now all the Satanists are going to take over or whatever.
Well, I don't see how when they decided to do that at the state capitol, I don't see how in their heads they could not envision that there was going to be pushback on that. Like you can't, none of them should be surprised that what happened. And even with the 10 Commandments, I think that they said, I think I read in another article, I guess they had to raise some funds for it. So they, for the 10 Commandments, and they also had to raise the funds for the satanic, thing. Yeah. So if you're able to raise the funds, the only major hurdle that they would have is getting someone to sponsor them. Like I said, in the legislature, that's really that's shady, and it was done 100% because they knew that anybody who wanted, nobody's going to try to fund a satanic statue. Nobody's going to try to fund, back up probably like something on Islam in that legislature. Nobody's going to back a Buddhist. So it's crazy. So to me, sometimes it's just better not to say anything, and it's also better to to not do anything and take your personal beliefs with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Otherwise, get ready for it all to come out.
100%.
Yeah, that's true.
Totally true. Awesome. Well, I'm not going to do weird news because I'm going to be yapping enough this episode. So we'll just get down into the meat and potatoes of our show. Either one of you watched the documentary I put on here? I did.
Yes.
It was interesting.
I feel like I've seen it before, but I think I've just seen stuff with that guy with the
Greer?
same.
Yeah.
Was that for our podcast that we've watched stuff with him before? Because that was driving me nuts.
Well, he was the forefront of Ada, like the documentary on Ada, so possibly. Mm-hmm. But there's just something about him that gives me the creeps, and I don't know why. I'm not saying he's a fraud. I'm not saying he's a liar. There's just something off about him. But he's very intelligent, and I thought it was a good show. It wasn't as much around Roswell as one of the reviews that I had read about it was, so it was kind of a throw off to
I was a little confused when it was like, this is about Roswell, and I was like, where's the Roswell?
Yeah, it talked about it really briefly, but somebody in here I was reading when looking for Roswell documentaries, this one came up. And it was like, okay, cool, I'll check it out. And then when I saw how new it was, I decided to share it because I figured, oh, this will be something that's a newer, because there's so many Roswell documentaries. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about this, because it's irritating. Because some of them, as much as whatever your personal beliefs are on what happened in the Roswell incident, quote unquote, some of these are just ridiculous. I mean, there are facts, there are things that reports that you can go by, what was discussed and what was reported then. And then there's this crazy shit that people start throwing onto an already messed up story to really muddy the waters. And so that's why I thought, okay, I grew up in Roswell. We all have kind of the same belief system. I mean, yeah, you've got others that, think differently, but especially as generations change, the story gets a little different. But we do have just this general knowledge of what we believe happened, and it's really just, and that's it. Like, there is no, when you see all this added bullshit, it's irritating. So that's why I was like, you know what, we're just gonna go through something really quick. I'll talk about, first of all, just how weird New Mexico is as a state, because I didn't really know this until I moved. And then you start talking about New Mexico and people are looking at you weird, like, this is odd. And I'm like, is it? I don't know. I mean, this is where I grew up. I don't know, what's unusual when you something that you grew up around and it's discussed all around you and you don't really think much about it. And then when you leave and you start talking about Roswell or New Mexico, and people look at you strange, you kind of learn to stop talking about it, because everybody's like, huh? And you're like, I guess I just better shut up. So I had a really weird childhood. I think, I grew up in a haunted house. My dad and my stepmom, they to this day, we all tell the stories. It's not just me talking about it. And then I saw, the exorcism that I was a witness to when I was around 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And then, I was in a car accident in Roswell that by, the firemen and police that were there told me I should not have lived through based on where I was sitting. We had a phone pole and flipped 5 times. And then just the daily life in our town was kind of weird, in not that, I mean, it's just bizarre. Like, I sent you guys a YouTube because we used to party in missile silos when we were in high school, because we just wanted to go drink somewhere, and this was 40 feet below the ground, a pretty great space to hide and drink. And we all knew about them. They're very well known. Some of them were actually had a locked door that you couldn't see. There was, a keypad and something behind there. It could have been a missile, could have been empty. We really didn't know. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I decided to do a little bit of a search, and I haven't searched about this ever. This was the first time. And sure enough, the first thing that popped up is YouTube, a news story about a 10-story missile silo for sale outside of Roswell. And I start playing it, and I'm like, this is the one. This is the silo we used to party in.
Oh, really?
And, yes. And then, so it's for sale now for somebody to buy if they want to live in it, I guess, or just have a nice, 10-story bunker to hang out at. And if the end of the world, I don't really fucking know. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of bizarre that, and this was back in 2014, that this thing was for sale. I don't know if it's sold or not. I'll have to do some digging. But anyway,
they only wanted $300,000 for it.
Yeah, it was cheap, and
under $300,000. It's a steal.
Yeah, and it came with 25 acres or something. It was we were shocked. I was like, dude, we should have bought that. Yeah,
that's That's wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Sweet.
it's New Mexico. Let me tell
Yeah.
you, land is a dime a dozen there. It is literally, my husband, when I first took him, was like, are we on the moon? Because it's just flat sand with tumbleweeds. It's really not a popular place to be. Let's just say that. And then, you've got like, me also growing up, I mean, we used to go to White Sands, which is in Alamogordo, and play in the sand and, sled in the sand when it would get a little bit of like a crust of snow. And that's where they tested. Oh, thank you. I'm getting a coffee.
That's a good decision.
You're a lifesaver. We ran out of coffee this morning, so I was like, no. But
everybody panicked.
Yeah, it was like, I'm going to be dead today. Anyway, so that's where they tested, nuclear weapons, and that's why it's white sand now. It turned the sands white. And then you also have Los Alamos. And that's a laboratory in northern New Mexico where they actually started to build and create the atom bomb. And it is now believed by people that live in New Mexico that it was also, after that, the place where they took the alien technology and reversed it and started coming up with, and when you read about Los Alamos, which is why I also shared 10 things you don't know about Los Alamos National Laboratory, is all these new discoveries they've made about materials and technology just happened to be coming around, 1952 is an interesting coincidence, but that's just what we all in our minds think. This is what the Los Alamos Laboratory does, is it re-engineers alien technology from the crash in 1947. Mm-hmm. And that's just like, that's what we believe. There is no like whispers, or it's not taboo. It's just discussion. It's just, that's it. And one year when I was in middle school, I was in a play, and the lady that did our play was friends with the choir, or whatever you call it, the drama lady at the Los Alamos school. And so we went up there to perform the play. And then we had a buddy, they paired us with buddies, and we stayed the night with that person. And it's basically, Los Alamos is just a laboratory town. The whole town is because of the laboratory. So you either work at a place that supplies or serves the people that are the scientists there, or you are a scientist. And the person that I stayed with, her dad was a scientist, and he was never allowed to talk about his work, ever. He came home. They never knew what he was doing. They never knew what he was working on. He was never allowed to discuss it. It was so weird. It was just really weird. And even then, I thought that was weird. I'm like, really? Like, my dad comes home from his work and he talks about his stuff and what he did and who he talked. Yeah, never allowed to ever discuss it. So they lived that was the life that they lived there. So it just wanted to say all that because I wanted you kind of get an understanding of, it's a bizarre state. It really is. And my dad used to always say this, and I don't know where he got this this stat from, but he always would tell me, and it would just bring it up in conversation all the time, that New Mexico was the number 2 state that would be attacked, or AKA bombed, like if there was a war, due to the insane number of missiles, military equipment, and laboratories in the state. Of course, D.C. being the number 1 place that another country would go after. And mainly his reasoning is because it's such a dry climate and there's so much land that's the military just chose that to house most of their missiles and equipment and everything. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And I never knew like where the heck he got that stat. I mean, he said it all the time, and he certainly sounded like he knows what he's talking about. I'll have to ask him at some point. But my dad, like I said, is a business owner in Roswell. My stepmom, she grew up there. Her family grew up there. Her parents grew up there. And she's like known as like a local celebrity. I don't know. She was the county commissioner of Chavez County, which is Roswell is housed in. And then she was also the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And she just retired probably a couple of years ago. Which Chamber of Commerce is responsible with dealing with the tourism and, news narrative of the crash, because that's mainly what she has to deal with all the time there. And I shared you a picture of my stepmother because there is an actual city limit sign that this artist created, and this is literally at the city limits of Roswell, and it shows a UFO with aliens, and there's a woman who looks like she's in like old-timey clothes, like offering the aliens a pie. The artist created her with my mother and my stepmom. So it looks just like my stepmother, and that's they know. And then there's further off on the side of the picture is also a broken down or a truck, like an old-timey truck, and he's like offering this alien like jumper cables, like the alien spaceship's battery is dead or something. It's really cute. It's a really cute picture.
So
that's
how
going
much
on
of
Facebook right now? Yeah.
How much is it a boom to the economy as far as this Roswell stuff?
Well, that's what I'm going to get into, because honestly, until the mid 90s, this was not a thing. It was not nobody would come and see. You'd get the random tourist every once in a while, but it was just a normal town. We didn't have any UFO, anything, no signs, no acknowledgement that happened. And honestly, people had an issue with other people coming from outside and questioning or asking, because we never knew what their intentions were. Nobody wanted to be made fun of or mock what the story was, because this is our history. To them, to the people of Roswell, up until the mid-90s, we did not take kindly to people coming in there and being nosy and wanting to see the town, because it was either going to be some weirdos that, why would you believe this? That's a crazy story. Even though we believe it, to us outsiders, believing it was weird and uncomfortable. So it was kind of a catch-22.
That is weird, yeah.
It is weird because I think we just had too many people showing up there and being weird and like it being uncomfortable and bizarre and not liking. Why did you travel all the way to the middle of fucking nowhere? There's nothing to see here. Get the hell out,
Move along.
Yeah. But within that, I was taught this happened in history in school. Like, this was just a part of our history lessons in school. Like, this happened, and this is what it was, and here's the story. And along with, any other history in New Mexico and in the United States, it was just sprinkled in there, like, and people talked about it like as far as like a point of reference, like, yeah, back when the Brazil thing happened, it was around that time, and people would be like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, and that was just, we knew, it was late 40s, That's really what the only thing that was that it was used in with the conversation. It wasn't and we also a lot of the people didn't like to talk about it because the people that lived that were threatened horribly not to ever talk about it. So for a long time, nobody talked about it. Then it kind of started just being dropped as a fact in conversation and taught, but it wasn't there. You weren't going to hear from the people that it directly correlated to until later. When I stepped in there, people had kind of relaxed some, and like I said, it was taught in our schools, and we actually went on a field trip to the actual crash site. There's nothing to see there. You really don't want to go. There's nothing to see. There's just a rock with a big old like dent in it, and they say that's where it hit. That's it. There's nothing. So you would be driving 60 miles out of Roswell for nothing. But then, and this is my point of reference. It could be a little off, but once the movie Independence Day, which I watched last night just for good old times, because it's like one of my favorite movies anyway. But when that movie came out, it was like caused chaos. Like, people all of a sudden were like, oh yeah. And I don't know if it's because in the movie, like, the government admits to hiding and covering it up, and so it just became like this I don't know. Like, I don't know what happened, why that caused so much crazy. But people started coming into Roswell. And at the time, my stepmother was the manager of a TV network. And so things were crazy because, you know, the stories that were coming in and everything, people just coming in droves. There wasn't enough hotel space. We just weren't prepared for it. And there was really nothing to see. I mean, it was just a town. There was a couple of UFO museums, but they were small and they were ridiculous. It was just nothing. You would be bored to death going through them. And because of the people, it got so crazy that they had to change and they had to evolve. There was nothing that you could do, so they might as well just go with it. And then as they're going with it, they start to see how lucrative this is and what a boom it's doing for the town. And, you know, we got an Applebee's. Holy shit. You would have thought that town was like, you know, Applebee's. Holy crap. You know, like we made it then. And then that was in like 1996. And then in 1997, a year later, in July, because the crash happened July 5th, I believe, 1947. Well, it just so happens that after that whole phenomenon with Independence Day came, then the 50th anniversary hit the next year. And it was like, they decided to kind of do like a fun little celebration. And that was it. That was peak, like the tourist boom went nuts. We had Oprah like rent a whole floor of one of the very few hotels we had, and for her little crew. And that, of course, took a lot. I mean, we didn't have a lot of hotel space. People, and my stepmother almost rented my room out, but she ended up using a crew from one of the main, I can't remember, I think it was, I'm trying to remember the TV station she worked for, but they sent down people from, I think it was like New York, to cover it. So they ended up staying in our rooms, me and my sister's rooms. Oh shit! Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. That was weird in my ears. Anyway, but people were renting rooms out for like $4,000 for the week, just a bedroom in their house, for people wanting to come. And this is way before like Airbnb. And so it was like word of mouth, where we were like posting things on boards in Roswell, and people were reaching out and saying, this person's got this for, you know, they're renting their room out, and just their bedroom, like a little, like whatever shoddy bedroom they had, they were renting out for thousands of dollars for that week, just for the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash. It was crazy. It was anarchy. And even Demi Moore showed up, who never ever claimed she was from Roswell, which she was. She actually went to school with one of my mom's best friends. She brought her yearbook over from when they were in grade school, and sure enough, there's a picture of Demi Moore. She's got like this boy's haircut, very similar to what she's got now, and well, before, like when she had her boy haircut phase. But yeah, so then she shows up. It's like, oh, now you claim that you're from here, because before you always said you're from like Texas or something. But anyway, but yeah, so that's what happened. So then all of a sudden after that, we started getting the UFO museum moved to the downtown main strip of Roswell, which downtown is like one street there. Yeah, it's very small. And all the lanterns in town turned green with UFO faces on them. And the McDonald's Playland built a giant UFO. And it just all went crazy after that. So yes, that's that. Any questions? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Well, no. Well, I want to ask you, like, do a lot of your friends, Kristi, do most people know that you're from that area? And like, what type of questions do you get from friends? I mean, for me, I can definitely see your enthusiasm in the topic, but are there any particular things outside of this podcast that people will just ask you generally about growing up in the area? Or do most people nowadays just kind of, Roswell might not necessarily be in the forefront of public consciousness because now, of course, we've got the 24-hour news cycle, the internet or whatever. So it's more specialized. Like if you're into something, you'll join a group or a forum to talk about it. But have any of your friends over the years ever asked you, about anything about your experience?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have two groups of people that I kind of categorize. One would be the ones that are like, holy shit, like that's the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. I believe this happened. Tell me everything. I want to know every detail. What, have you experienced anything? And what, do you know anybody that knew something or, just very... And even there's my brother-in-law, when he found out I was from Roswell, he like pulled me over because we were at a family picnic thing, and he was just like talked to me for hours. Like he was just fascinated. And then you got the ones that kind of make a funny joke like, are you an alien? And then they just move on. Like they don't care. It's not like, and I'm fine with that. I don't really, it doesn't bother me either way. You can either be fascinated with it or you can just make a big joke and move on. It's not like, I don't care. But whenever people do get excited about it, I get excited because it is a part of where my history. My parents still live there. It's still a huge part of their lives. And whether you believe it or not, it is, I've always been one of the proponents of where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's just so much information and so many witnesses and so many, people who were either threatened and they came out later and finally on their deathbed, told their stories, or their family, once that person died, comes forward and says, this is what they told us. We promised we would never talk about it. Just too much of the same shit, too much of the same story. So something happened. And I was having this conversation with my husband last night because it's one of those things where something crashed. Something did. And I told him, and he was like, it wasn't a weather balloon. Whatever it wasn't a weather balloon, because in that time, the military base there was huge, and they were always throwing up weather balloons. That was like, they did that on a weekly basis. So you can't tell me that when they went to that crash site and they saw that wreckage, that they would have mistaken something for a weather balloon. They would have known that was a weather balloon. They didn't know at the time what it was. There's no way you can tell me these people handling these weather balloons every day could look at something and go, oh, I think it's a UFO. Oh, whoops, no, it was a weather balloon. Like, that just makes no sense. So that's what really gets people up in arms whenever you say, it was a weather balloon. It wasn't a fucking weather balloon.
Well, I noticed that, in the news, there was also that video of the Air Force colonel, that was, I think this was, how long ago was that?
After the wreck?
No. There was actually a link to, right. It was like an Air Force colonel that came out with the memoir, the book that they had, at the press briefing. Yes. And they actually had, but they also had video of other things that weren't weather balloons, like the little ship thing or whatever. Yeah. They actually did have video of other things. So what do people down there think about, them saying, okay, well, there were weather balloons, which is a fact that there were some. Absolutely. But also they had some of these little spaceships that actually look like flying saucers that they were using in conjunction with that. So what do the people in the area say about that? Because some of those things actually had dummies in them, and they showed videos of all that stuff. So do they totally not believe in that either? Or,
well,
what's that?
That's one of the things where it's like we have three types of people. One that say it's a weather balloon and you're like dismissed immediately because that's just fucking ridiculous. Then you have the other people that think it was a military experiment gone, crashed. And then you have the ones that think it was a UFO. And the argument there, and this is where I personally and most of the people in our town argue, is if it had been a military experiment, one, why didn't they come and pick it up? Like, if you have an experimental craft you're flying around, why was it just left there for a rancher to find. Wouldn't you think their asses would have been on that thing and like picking up those pieces before some dude found it? You know, it just that, and then the fact that it was in the middle of a horrible thunderstorm. Like, that's one of the things that all the people that lived that night remember the most, was that there was a horrible thunderstorm that night. And so if it was military, why were they flying an experimental craft in the middle of a really bad lightning storm that, you know, could have potentially caused it to crash?
Well, but I've got to jump in there.
Okay, do it.
Well, one of the reasons, even with aircraft or cars or anything, I mean, you want to test something in every type of environment.
Absolutely.
So you'll know. So if you know if it's going to hold up. So I mean, for me, I would absolutely test it in those conditions, because, you know, you need information on what would go on, you know, at certain times or in certain conditions. So why don't people gravitate towards that?
Because it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense to them. They don't think that a military experiment would just be left in the middle of a field for some rancher to find. You know, they don't just like build something really, really expensive and then throw it up in the air and then go, alrighty, well, let's go to bed. You know, they're watching that thing like closely. So if it's crashed, why wasn't somebody there to find it? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like, if that was a military experiment, there should have been action, and there should have been like on his ranch the second it happened. So unless it got lost, I mean, even then though, Brazel, the rancher that found it, had to beg somebody to come and get this thing, because he was annoyed by it. He didn't know what it was. He didn't fucking care what it was. His issue was that it was on his property, and his herd of cattle wouldn't go near it. And that was in the middle of a path to get his cattle from point A to point B on his ranch. And so his cattle were like, oh, hell no. They would not walk through that wreckage at all. And so he decided to drive into Roswell to find help. And it took him several requests from the sheriff to finally go out there and look at it. So I just have a hard time thinking that if this was a military experiment, that it would have just been left and this dude had to go beg somebody to help him, you know, get all this picked up. But I mean, that's what we think. We don't think that it would have been, it doesn't make any sense for somebody to, you know, ignore a crash like that if it was something to do with the military. But that's what we think. So, I mean, it's all open to interpretation, and that's just where our minds have shifted on it. Brazel, the guy that found the wreckage, regretted every single fucking day he drove into Roswell after that. I mean, his life was never the same. And so he wasn't a dude that wanted any of this or asked for any of it. He just wanted shit cleaned up so he could continue on with this fucking ranch, you know? Mm-hmm. So it was just sad for him and his family. He hated it. He hated everything about it, and he never talked about it again, ever. He would never speak. He wouldn't. I think his kids finally did, but he was miserable about it. So with that, that's what they all believe in Roswell, that something crashed, whatever it was. If something did crash, they don't think it was a weather balloon. After Brazel reported it to the sheriff didn't go. At first, he called the sheriff first, and the sheriff wouldn't respond. And so finally he drove the 60 miles into Roswell and was like, hey, I need help. There's something, you know, all over this wreckage, blah, blah, blah. And so finally the sheriff's like, fine, you know, and he gets in his car and drives out there to check it out. And then once he saw it, he's like, okay, this is weird. And he called, the sheriff, his name was Wilcox. He reports it to the military base. And days later, troops show up and start cleaning up the wreckage. Before that, there were several people in and out of there because the sheriff visited several times. He brought people. They were all picking shit up. You know, it wasn't an immediate response from the military to come and clean this up. So a lot of people have testified that they saw strange hieroglyphics on several pieces of the wreckage. Some people claim they took some of it when they went to see it, including, I think the sheriff said that he did as well. But then at this time, once the military starts to clean it up, the military releases a report that this wreckage was of a UFO. And they sent it out, and that they said they had recovered a flying, quote unquote, flying disc. I can't imagine getting that press release in a news cycle being like, what the fuck? But yeah, so then of course everybody starts picking it up, and it's hitting, radio and TV and newspapers, and then the military's like, oh shit. With that, a lot of contention is that during the recovery mission, 3 child-sized humanoids were also discovered. The reports were, and this is from a lot of people that claim they saw it, 2 were dead and 1 was still alive, but not conscious. A Roswell priest was called to give last rites to the bodies and was sworn to secrecy. He later admitted to seeing the bodies and giving them last rites. The Roswell Fire Department and police force backed up his claims that he was called onto the property but did not know what he had seen, since they were just in charge of sealing off the area and they were not allowed onto the crash site. So they backed up that he was there. Why a priest would be there if there wasn't a death, I don't know, because that's kind of weird that you would call a priest to a crash site. So
yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking about.
And kind of weird, and I guess this was just the time, but I mean, you see 2 aliens and you're like, let's call a priest and give them our last rites, talking about religion. Yeah. These aliens, I'm sure, believed in God, or whatever, like, okay, all right, that just cracks me up. So with that, most of the locals believe that the one survived and was taken to Area 51, which is in Nevada and not New Mexico. That's another thing, Yardley, that I get all the time. So you've been to Area 51 then? I'm like, that is not in New Mexico. Like, get a map, people.
Of course.
I also get a lot of, oh, you're from New Mexico? You don't look Spanish. I'm like, it's because it's New Mexico. It's an actual state in the United States. People don't know it's a state either. They think it must be some new area in Mexico. Anyway, so I've
seen a slogan. It's like, not new and not Mexico.
Yeah. Exactly. So they think, and most people think, that they're the alien that lived, and probably the bodies of the others, were taken to Area 51 along with the ship, and used as reverse technology there, and then also in Los Alamos. So they believe that they took some of the stuff and sent it to Los Alamos, and they believe some of it was taken to Area 51. And there's also, and I did include it, some people, I personally don't know what to think about it, that there were 2 crashes. And I'm thinking, if there's 2 crashes, these people can't fucking drive. I mean, really? Aliens coming down here and they're like, newfangled technology spaceships and fucking crashing all over the place, like, makes no sense to me. So I have a hard time believing that, but some people do think that.
Hey, I don't have a hard time believing that nobody or nothing's perfect. Mm-hmm. It happens. I think it's possible. Well, let me ask you something quickly. Like, as far as when people talk about government disclosing things or not disclosing things, a lot of times people say that the government knew about these things happening with the Roswell incident and aliens, and one of the reasons why they didn't come out publicly because of the reputation of the military. They can't protect us against an alien threat. And I'm like, these motherfuckers can't protect us from Russia's nukes. You know what I mean?
No shit.
So, I mean, to me, just saying that they don't disclose it because of, they'll be seen as weak. And it's like, well, there's plenty of threats here on this planet that we couldn't be fully protected from. So I don't really think that should be would be a reason why the government would not, disclose that there are aliens. And I kind of think that they're kind of in a bind a little bit because, if they don't say anything about aliens, people are going to say that it's a cover up. But then if they come out and say that there are aliens, people are going to say it's a false flag operation, and that's going to bring in the New World Order. So it's like, well,
yeah.
So I think if I was the government, I just wouldn't say anything either.
Yeah. And this is just my personal opinion. I've honestly never really discussed that part of it with what people think in New Mexico, but at the time, war, we were just coming out of a war. Russia was a major threat. Honestly, I think the government looked at it as not wanting to share this discovery because of what the possibilities it could be for other countries to get this technology. But with that, also, I was reading, I think I was watching a show, I think it was Ancient Aliens or whatever the other day that actually talked about beyond Roswell. A couple of different crashes happened, one in Russia where they claimed that Russia then got, so it was kind of like an unspoken like competition on who was going to reverse technology these crafts first, if that makes any sense. And it was more about keeping the secrets from the other countries than it was our own people. But, it ended up, of course, being that way as well. I mean, I personally think that they were selfish about it. They wanted to discover this technology, and they wanted to keep it a secret because they didn't want anybody else to know. They wanted the United States, because we're so like in our own fucking bubble. That's all that really matters, is the United States being this leader, this grand leader of the world, and can't look past our own bullshit to say and share something that's the greatest discovery of mankind, is to know that we're not alone, and within all the infinite universes out there, of course there's got to be something else out there. I mean, that's just a given to me. Now, if it's gotten here or not, that's for other people to believe or not to believe. But, so yeah, I mean, that's my personal belief, is they kept it secret because they were greedy and they wanted the technology for themselves in the middle of these wars that they were coming in and out of. But anyway, so after the news picked up the press releases, the military began saying it was a weather balloon and had Jesse Marcel, the head intelligence officer of this case, pose with the remains of the weather balloon for a newspaper. So, what?
He just looks like a dude who's like can't tore up their aluminum foil in the house or something. He's looking crazy.
I saw a documentary last night that had his daughter on, and she told, the story that he was pissed because he looked like a fool. They made him look like a fool because he's the one that started this the recovery. He's the one that said this is UFO recovery. And then they're like, no, you can't say that. You're going to have to now say it was a weather balloon. And they're saying that, look, if you can see his face, he does not look happy. He's like, fuck you guys. Holding up what's clearly a weather balloon, So he's sitting here holding this thing. It's clearly a weather balloon. And it's not he says this is not what he discovered. This is not the wreckage. This was they tore up a weather balloon and made him say this is the wreckage. So she also said that he came home that first night that he found the crash site, with a box full of stuff that he said was pieces of the crash that he had picked up. She said some of the items were metal so thin that you could crumble them up, but when you released them, it would immediately go straight again with no wrinkles. It was like aluminum, but it didn't wrinkle. He told them it was of alien origin, and then he buried the items to protect his family because he was getting pushback from the military, and he was afraid he would get in trouble. She says they don't know where he buried it, but him and her uncle had a conversation out on the porch while they were all looking at the box and playing with the stuff. And after that night, they never saw the stuff again, and he buried it. So where he buried it, who knows? But hey, we could go to their house and start digging. I don't know. So we already talked about this, but the weather balloons were common occurrences. No one thinks it was a fucking weather balloon. They don't think that anybody who was cleaning it up wouldn't have recognized it upon first sight as being a balloon. And even the sheriff, because you could see these things. It wasn't just the military that saw them. I mean, the weather balloons were visible with the naked eye. People saw them in the sky all the time. So they all believe, you know, even the sheriff, they think if he had gone there and that was a weather balloon, they would have seen it. And there's no way a weather balloon would take up almost a mile of wreckage. Those things aren't that big, and they don't have that many pieces to them. So it makes no sense. Unless, like you said, Yardley, it was accompanied with another military technology ship or something next to it. I don't know. But so there's a famous funeral home, not famous, infamous as far as Roswell, because it's a huge white mansion. And it's Ballard Funeral Home. They're friends of our families. They have been in the funeral business for like 5 generations. They actually got a phone call during all of this from the military asking questions if they have child-sized coffins and asking information about it and how big the coffins are. They thought that was kind of an unusual question from the military, and they've always said that. They always have talked about that. That's just a running thing, that they got that phone call and they thought it was bizarre, and it is kind of bizarre. So yeah, a weird random question to be asking if either you got dead bodies of kids, which I doubt they would have put in a vehicle, or they're aliens the size of kids. So anyway, it is weird, and it's random. I mean, especially during at that time, that week, you did get that phone call. Is kind of weird. There's so many stories I could tell, but I mean, I'd be here all day. Maybe if, as you know, documentaries come out, we can talk about more stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, it happened in the 70s, and of course I've heard of it, especially with what we do on this podcast, but I haven't gone into enough depth in it to figure out what I do and don't believe. And while we were trying to watch Unacknowledged the other night, my husband was just like, that's so silly, blah, blah, blah. This guy's so full of crap. And here's what this could be, and here's what that could be. And I just sort of, no offense, Kristi, either, but I need space away from both the true believers and the non-believers to kind of figure out where my actual thoughts lie without literally hearing your voice and his voice of like, this is this, that was definitely that, because I was there. And then him like, no, this guy's obviously full of crap. And all this is like, yes, like, yeah, I just kind of need like a quiet time. And when does a mom ever get that kind of thing? But
shit. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody just thinks that. So if you put all the pieces together, and you're open to believing that this was a possibility and that it happened, you know, everybody always says, why then? And honestly, we all just think it's because the atom bomb was being tested in not just a few hop and skips away in Alamogordo. The laboratory Los Alamos was building the atom bombs and testing them as well. Our military base in Roswell was one of the only military bases that was equipped to carry nuclear weapons at that time. It was the only one in the world. They claim. I don't know how you can claim in the world, because how do you know what the fuck other people are doing? But in our country, for sure, it was the only place. And they almost feel like it was like once those things started being tested and nuclear weapons start going off, it's almost like a calling card to other life. Like other, you know, planets are waking up and going, oh, okay, they finally hit a phase of their advancement that they're into the they're cute in their little nuclear phase now, you know, like, and kind of coming over and checking out what we're doing. And my dad, this is a story that my dad told me. Actually, I had never heard it before until I went for one of the anniversaries. It wasn't the 50th. I think it was the next year. I ended up going home and going to one of the anniversaries of the crash. And my dad told me a story he had never told me before. And I was like, why the fuck have you never told me this before? But he swears by it. And listen, this guy is not somebody that believes anything and everything. He's very skeptical. So it was kind of a shock even hearing these words come out of his mouth. But when I was born in Houston, and we moved out of Houston when I was 5 to New Mexico. When he lived in Houston, we lived near NASA, and my dad worked as like a car dealership manager there, and became friends with a lot of the guys that worked at NASA. And he says, and I thought this was fascinating because coming from my dad, talking to a scientist one night at a bar, this guy told my dad that when we went to the moon for the first time, the astronauts say they saw aliens on alien ships, like in the dark, like in the shadow, dark side part of the moon, watching us basically like take our first baby steps. That's what he says. He says that his story is way better than mine, and I can't remember all his details, but it shocked me because I was like, "What? You've never said this before?" He's like, "Oh yeah." He told me. He's like, I asked him, and he's like, "If you told me and you told somebody else, I would say you're a liar, but this is what we know to be true back when this happened." So I don't know what I believe about that. I don't know. My dad just doesn't just talk shit like that, though. So it's kind of an interesting addition to the possibilities of why this happened when it did. I mean, as we take our baby steps forward, you know, somebody up there could just be watching us like we're like a petri dish. So anyway, that's all I got. Although I do want you to, this was an interesting video I watched. This guy, Boyd Bushman, he was the Lockheed Martin senior scientist back in that time. He died in 2014. Did an interview right before his death where he says that he has photos of aliens, alien spacecraft, and obtained stories from his coworkers. I watched some of it this morning and it was really interesting, so I decided to add it. And he's holding up, I took a screenshot where he's holding up that picture of that alien, and what does that alien look like, guys? Does that remind you of anything?
Little Ada.
Uh-huh. I was like, wow, that kind of looks like Ada. Anyway, so whether you believe that or not, it was a really interesting confession. He sounds like, bless his little heart, he's got all these old photos he's holding up, and he's got a little boards, and he's got a little, like, almost like a PowerPoint on a cardboard fold out of spaceships and stuff. And I just found it fascinating because this guy was a very reputable scientist. And so he's either went full on bonkers or he wanted to tell his story before he died. So you guys can watch it if you want and form your own opinions. I just found it like really fascinating. So, and that's that. And I did really talk the whole time, and I hate that, but whatever. So I got it out. I finally told my Roswell story.
Nice.
So
Yeah, that's cool.
Anybody have any questions? You can email us or tweet us at creepin_it, and we can try to answer them as best we can about Roswell. So, Moni, what we got going next week?
Next week, actually, there's a Netflix movie. It's based on a Stephen King short story, and it's newer. It came out last year, starring Thomas Jane, who I really like. 1922 is the title of the film, if anybody wants to watch along between now and then. And also, surprise, both of you guys have Escondido Public Library cards now.
Woo-hoo!
You should have received emails, but Kristi, you're on hold for the book Full Dark, No Stars by Stephen King, because it's just a short story in there and it's an ebook, so you can download and read it if you'd like to. But like I said, it's nice and short, and Yardley, not to be left out, has a library card now as well. So
yeah, I just
need up your guys' addresses.
Yeah.
What's that? Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Yes, all your info is on the document for next week already. You've got a 4-digit PIN that I created and everything else. So
Look at
just
you.
like that, a public library card.
So
like
in the know.
Fifth grade again. But
Love
at any rate, yeah, so definitely I'm going to read the story. If you guys get a chance to, that'd be great. But like I said, it's nice and short, but I totally get it if there's no time. But we're going to watch the movie on Netflix. And also, though, I posted a video on next week's document, and I also posted it to our Facebook page already. It is talking about how, if you believe, and how they would be possibly, the world that Stephen King has created in all of his different books, he's published almost 100 now, if they're connected and how that would be true. And it's pretty fascinating, whether you believe it or not. It's really interesting fan theories that have been created around that. So I'd like to kind of talk about the world of Stephen King, not just this movie.
Hey, did y'all know that Slender Man released this weekend?
Yeah, I wanted to go see it, and I have not heard good things.
I know. I've heard really, really bad things about it. So I'm like, bummer.
We'll wait to rent it, but I definitely do want to at some point.
All right. Sounds good.
Very nice.
Yardley, you want to give us your cred?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker. And if you want to check out some of the podcasts at Indie Radio, just go to indieradio.org.
Awesome. Moni?
I am Rebel Moni on Twitter and Moni Bear on Instagram. And I look forward to talking to you guys again next week.
Awesome. Thank you guys for putting up with me and my yapping. And I will catch y'all on the flip side.
Well, look at them go. Trail line, that's what I mean. Yeah, ignorant and blind. They should just open their eyes.